Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Mr. Bryant Tao, who is the Chief Security Officer at Leapfrog Services. For over 25 years, Bryant has held responsibilities as an entrepreneur and senior executive in all aspects of risk management. Currently, Bryant and his team assist clients with complete security programs that include strategy, governance, and operations, and focus on managing risk within Leapfrog's Ring of Security methodology. We're going to talk a little bit about what that is, and we're going to talk about some of the key IT changes that are in store for us for 2023 and several other things. But before we do that, I want to say hi to Bryant. Bryant, how are you today?
Doing awesome, man. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Whereabouts you located?
Leapfrog Services is on North Road Hills in Atlanta. I actually live in Nashville and have been here off and on for most of my life.
That's awesome. I've never been to Nashville. I mean, I've been all over our country. I've never been to Memphis or Nashville, and considering all the good music and traditions, I got to get through there. Is life all back to normal since post-COVID life, I mean?
Yeah, well, being in Tennessee, life was back to normal probably 5-6 months ahead of everybody else. So yeah, it's I mean, really, every now and then you'll see somebody in a mask or something like that, and hopefully they're protecting themselves. Maybe they're high risk or something like that. But yeah, so you would really never know that we went through all the stuff that we went through at that time, right?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I was out to a little lounge last Friday night, and I mean, it was just elbow to elbow. It was completely packed, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so weird." It's like we were, everything was shut down, and now it's just full blown back open. So hey, Brian, before we get started, I'd like to do a level set, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your definition of cybersecurity, and then we'll start to get into some of the other topics.
Sure. Well, okay. So as you mentioned in the marketing thing, right? Wouldn't my mother be proud bio? In doing this as long as I have, right?
Yeah.
The issue that I have essentially built a career around, Mark, is kind of surprising to most people when we talk about cybersecurity. And that is that over half of your attack surface is non-technical, right? So we hear about cyber, and you hear CSOs and the like talk about Log4j, or take your pick on the attack of the day. However, when you do the root cause analysis on any of the headline breaches, I've been using the Equifax breach. Now that was getting stale, so fortunately Rackspace has come up and now given me something a little more current to talk about. Those issues are 90, probably 8% program in nature. Right. So I mentioned I used the Equifax breach. Those patches had been released for 6 months. So yeah, right. They got creamed, but that's not a technical problem, Mark. There's it was a change management, was a lack of resources, lack of attention. Something about that program failed in such a way that caused that to happen to them. And now
Absolutely.
with the Rackspace breach, there's been no official declaration, but if you're in the business, you know that those 0-day exchange vulnerabilities came out, whatever the time is, 3 months ago, right? Whatever that time was, 2 months ago. And as a service provider hosting Exchange, I mean, that was our immediate mission, was all hands on deck, get these things patched and get them fixed or get them isolated, right? Whatever compensating controls. When there's 0 days, you have an incident response plan, again, governance, right? So you have all those things in place to be able to take care of that. And if those things are not in place, you end up with a Rackspace issue, right? So when you ask me about my take on cybersecurity, I have to, in order to be effective in protecting not only the Leapfrog assets, but all of our managed customers operationally, and our basic and advanced stack security customers as well from an operational side, right?
Definitely. You know, I totally agree with you. When I first got into the space, I was under the impression as well that it was all super technical and, you had to be a PhD in computer science to step into a CISO role. But your description is much more accurate in terms of what the reality is. A lot of times, CISOs actually don't even have a super deep technical background, but they're very good at like program management, right? Understanding what policies they need to get in place, assigning responsibility for executing those policies, and then and then doing some type of audit or some type of follow up to make sure that they're doing it. And if a patch has been released for 6 months, and in the case of Equifax, and nobody flagged it, that's an issue. That's a process issue, right?
It is.
And yeah,
It
and
is.
so then if that's the case, though, then when you engage with your customers or prospective customers, how do you go about recognizing, one, that there is an issue there with their processes, okay, and then rectifying it?
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to answer that question in two phases, if you will. So the first of all is knowing, having a legitimate business impact analysis, right? A legitimate, understanding of where the keys to the kingdom are. Most of the, we'll call them more technical CISOs, are more attack oriented, in that, well, we know this vulnerability, that vulnerability, or this sort of, this APT, all those things, right? And so they're protecting against those things, rather than looking at it from the business on its way out, right? So what is the most important thing? Okay. So I'm gonna tie together process, as we were talking about, and the risks and how we protect it, and kind of forward looking and compensated controls, all in one example that we're actually in process with right now. So a longtime customer of Leapfrog, we have built out their program. We're in a run and maintain state, and so we go through third party risk, right? Again, program. Well, we have a set of servers that happen to be 30, I believe the number 32% of the overall revenue of this company goes through those servers, right? So that is obviously very high risk, high touch. Okay. So point number one. Point number two, well, as part of our third party risk program, when we do our diligence on that vendor, they flat out refused, Mark, to respond to any of our requests. So I want to know what's on it. I want to know the application. I need to know the coding, language. I need to know what are your security protocols on when you create the language. Are your people OWASP, right? Tell me about what's going on inside this server. And they absolutely refused to respond to anything. All right.
Is that because they
So
felt that type of information is just too sensitive to share with a vendor?
it could be anything. In my experience, when somebody refuses to answer those questions, it's largely because they don't have the answers. And if they don't have the answers, they're going to lose business. And if that is the case, that has to be my presumption, is that they don't. So now I'm in a position where not only do I have to protect this server because it's 30% of our revenue for our client, but now I have to protect myself from it.
Right.
Because I don't know what's in it. And if these guys, SolarWinds, right? Everybody knows the SolarWinds attack. They are the poster child for a supply chain attack. And if this server gets compromised or through a patch or something that they send to it because they got hit, and then my network gets hit because of it, now I've got to protect myself, protect the server itself, but also protect myself from that server. So we go back to the business and we're like, here's the situation. You have a business decision to make. Switch companies? Well, no, that's a lot, right? So that's not an option. Okay. Alternatively, here's our plan. So we're going to isolate that server, put it on its own segment, right? Do all the things that we need to do. So if it does blow up, it doesn't see anything. It cannot traverse anywhere else on our network, right? So we are doing the things that we need to do to protect ourselves from the server the same way as we protect ourselves or protect the server itself. And the point I want to make to all of that is 100% of that is program, right? Number one, to your point, having a business impact analysis, knowing where the keys to the kingdom are, knowing that that is such a large portion of our business that we need to give it the diligence that it requires to keep the business up and running, right? Number two, part of the program is third party risk, right? We all would agree that third party and fourth party even, because highly likely that company is outsourcing a certain amount of their hosting and whatever to another party. Now I've got a fourth party risk to be concerned about. I wouldn't know that because they're not answering the questions. Right, but because we have a governance program in place and a regular cadence of third party risk, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that kind of thing, right? Now I feel like that we have a solid story to tell to the business and the board of directors to get the funding necessary and the equipment necessary to do what we need to do to properly protect that server. So when something actually does happen, as I famously say to everybody, we turn it into an eye roll instead of a run down the street with your hair on fire moment, right? So the K2E server got creamed. Okay, well we've got flash backups that we can wipe it, build up a new VM or whatever we need to do, right, and then push that back down. It's isolated. We know for a fact that there's not a physical possibility for it to get anywhere else. And I've got now roughly a 20-minute recovery time on that server, right? So that's all of that is programmed. There's not, you didn't hear me say in any part of that a command line, right? It's all program and governance.
Makes a ton of sense. As basically, you want to be aware of what you have, then you have to figure out your priorities, where you're going to place your bets. Then you have to execute the plan, and then you get peace of mind, or at least a little bit, right? Otherwise, like you said, eye roll versus when you're doing this, in the initial phases, like I guess you could call it the discovery phase.
That's exactly what we call it. That's right.
Okay. How much of that is automated versus, going through a endless list of questions?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously you automate what you can. Things that can be automated are basic vulnerability scans. Patching can be automated to a certain degree, right? So you automate what you can, and then you very closely monitor logs for confirmation. You routinely test and confirm, right? Trust but verify. So you can automate those things. What you can't automate is creating a culture of security inside the organization, right? You can push out training once a year, and every study that's ever been done will confirm that's a fail. Right, because that data goes stale inside your organization typically within weeks. It has to be a regular dose of those kind of things. So you can't really automate that. You can put things on a regular cadence for sending out, emails and phishing testing and those kind of things. So maybe a little bit of that. Third party risk, as I mentioned, you can have regular cadences for that as well. But that's really tough to automate because every vendor is going to be different. In some way, right? So you've got some vendors that are going to be, tier 1, tier 2s they're hosting vendors or providers, or software as a service, the Workdays of the world and those kind of things. And then you're going to have other vendors that are just simply doing some basic hosting or backup. So who knows what, all the way down to the cleaning vendors that where they're sending in cleaning crews that have access potentially to where all of your endpoints are, right? So how are you handling that? So those things can be automated to some degree, but they have to be physically touched and physically managed, audited, monitored, and those kind of things. So I would say you can probably automate about 15-20% of the technical side of it, but it even still takes the output of that automation still has to be verified. So there still has to be a good deal of human capital that goes into that for it to be effective.
Well, then for the parts that can't be automated, I guess even though those parts, but in general, how long does it take to get through the discovery phase? And let's just, you can give scenario, a company size with multiple locations, etc., but just kind of create the context and then explain like how long the process usually takes.
Yeah, so that's a bit like asking how much does a car cost. right? Because, are we a Formula One trying to hit 200 miles an hour, or are we trying to get grandma to the grocery store? Right. So based on the size of business, if we set a context, and a lot of people want to do this by employee count. So we have 200 employees. Well, if you have a 200 employee law firm, there's highly likely you've got 600 IP touch points, right? Because they've got a mobile device, a laptop, maybe a desktop, who knows what else. But if you have the same amount of employees in a manufacturing firm, a good portion of those are non-technical. You may have 30. So it's very, very difficult to do that by employee type. And then the other element to that too is the number of compliance targets, right? So if you have a publicly traded hospital, so you've got GUSH, right? PCI, HIPAA, HITECH, right? I mean, go down the list of alphabet soup of all the compliance targets that they may have. So that requires a good portion of discovery as well. So that's a very, very difficult question to answer. But I will say this. It's almost it's very, very consistent in the amount of discovery that you have to review to the amount of remediation that has to be done. So for example, if we have a whole lot of discovery because we have a whole lot of policies, procedures, and those kind of things to review, chances are there's not a lot of remediation because their program is likely very mature in that. But if we have very, very little to review, chances are their program is not very mature, and therefore there's a lot of remediation work to do. It's almost finite in that spectrum, and just where on that spectrum are you? So very little remediation typically means a lot of discovery. And vice versa, right? So it's very interesting that way. Small, medium business. I mean, if you're let's call it touch points. If you're 200 to 300 touch points, discovery can typically be done with 1, maybe 2 compliance targets in probably 3 to 4 weeks, just to be the most direct answer.
Gotcha. Earlier you talked about a culture of security, and it's really amazing. I see it organization by organization. But more country by country. As I mentioned earlier, I lived overseas, places like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and it's amazing the difference. And I kind of feel like, especially on the West Coast of the U.S., cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important, and it's not even something that really needs to be emphasized in terms of everybody understands that they have a kind of they have a role to play. I don't care what your job is. I mean, even if you're non-technical, you still have to pay attention to who walks in the front door, right? But can you give some examples of best practices for taking a company that doesn't have a culture of security and making that really, really important in that organization?
Sure. Okay, so I'm gonna go 2 different ways with this. So first of all, it's almost become cliche, that tone from the top, right? Having executives that have the buy-in, that believe in it, that will both resource and support a culture. That's kind of where it comes from. So operationally, I call it small doses, where we're doing emails on a regular basis that talk about current threats or something. Okay, so we're coming into the holiday season. So recently, our clients are getting email notifications that just a bit of education, right? Watch out for those spam emails that are coming in, or spear phishing emails even, that come from Amazon or eBay and such, because Sally's doll's not going to arrive on time, and you need to click here to get that problem resolved, right? So the idea is they're going to try to raise the heart rate, make you panic a little bit in such a way that you're going to do something that you otherwise wouldn't do. So having those kind of communications and those kind of things go out on a regular basis are very helpful. Another one might surprise you. One of the things that I've done for clients for many, many years is to provide an internal training on, say, cyberbullying or something. How do we protect our kids online at home? and people come to that. They're very, very interested. So the basic practices that you teach during those things are basic practices that walk right back through the front door and raise the culture inside the business. Right. When you pull out the mommy and the daddy clause, right? So how are
Yeah.
these cyber things affecting our children? And it becomes more and more real to them. Those basic practices become part of their day-to-day thought, and they bring those practices back into the business. And I can show you time and time again where spear phishing test results becomes so much better. Basic catching of I mean, to all of those kind of things that you would expect increase exponentially with the company supporting a how do you keep yourself on safe online at home. So there's little things like that that a lot of people don't think about that build culture, right? Because culture is not just affecting the way somebody thinks about cybersecurity. It affects your employees about how they feel about it. And if when you attach that to their home life, that's those skills that you're teaching and that thought process that you're teaching through that walks right back through the front door. And they're using that in such a way that it also protects the company.
I think that's a great approach. I've never thought about that, but you're just taking something and then repackaging it in a way that makes it more attractive or interesting to your target audience. And yeah, I can just imagine somebody getting an email saying, "Hey, we've got a training today on corporate IT security. Be there." And be like, "Oh man, another one of these." But if you package it in the way you said, where it's like, how to protect your children from cyberbullying or something related to that, I'd sign up. I want to know.
Yeah, and you want to do that opposite. So October is cybersecurity month, right? So everybody seems to do their training in October to attach themselves to this arbitrary date that I guess NIST or somebody said. But either way, you want to do that opposite, within 3, 4, 5, 6 months, opposite of when you do your regular annual training, right? And keep those kind of things fresh and top of mind, right? So so my point to all that, Mark, is when you're thinking about these things, you have to think about culture, right? Culture is not what people do, it's how they feel. And getting cyber ingrained into them in such a way that they know not to click on things, right? And it almost becomes laughable. I hear people in break rooms talking about, and they think I'm stupid enough to click on this or something like that, right? Those kind of things come out, and that's what you want, right? I mean, we even do something that we call a cyber palooza.
Okay.
Where we take during our cybersecurity week, where we take a cube and from my work with the bureau, I've got FBI crime tape, but we kind of put over the cube and a red light in there, and we put violations in the cube, right? Thumb drives being left around, private information being left on the desk, right? Those kind of things around, and would have people fill out a form and name all the things, and then give them a gift card or something like that, right? So whatever the budget is for that organization. And people cheat. They get in there and they'll be in the break room. Did you see that one? No, I didn't. Oh, I didn't see that one. I need to go. And that's awesome. That's exactly what you want, right? You want them talking about it, and if it's cheating, fine, whatever, right? We just want them to be discussing it and going along those lines, right? So it's very fun that way.
That's awesome. I was just thinking about, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as cybersecurity from the personal point of view, right? It was just like, because, we just started having, PCs, and so this getting people my generation to adopt secure practices, I think might take more work, or historically took more work than, because when I watch my younger children's them interact with their peers, it's like hopefully they've acquired this kind of healthy suspicion of anything that looks unusual, and they're able to navigate, and they do share information, and they do, like you said, they do laugh about it. They're like, "Oh, look at this," and that's kind of cool. And I hope we get to the point where it's just everybody's aware.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to me. Like I said, I've been doing this a long time. how the internet and cybersecurity has followed transportation security, right? Because we all use public roads.
Right.
We all suspect to some degree that there's going to be regulation on it, speed limits and signages and those kind of things. And then how we use them. What's our responsibility for choosing a safe car, wearing seat belts, and those kind of things. So what you were saying there, what brought that to mind was the seatbelt analogy that I've been using for years.
Yep.
Right. So 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we didn't have seatbelts in cars. Right? Maybe 50. I don't know. I'm getting.
And if you did have one and you put it on, how uncool were you? Right.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Now, if you don't put your seatbelt on, regardless of the thing that screams at you constantly, the driver's going to look at you like you're an idiot if you don't put your seatbelt on.
Absolutely.
Because the culture and the education and everything that's gone in around the whatever, and that has turned into laws in most places, right? Those kind of things have forced people to put seatbelts on, and now it's just not even a thing. When you get in the car, you put the seatbelt on. And I think internet security has gone very much that way, and it's evolving very similarly to the way transportation has evolved, almost to the point. There was a study that I came across last week, and there was a whole bunch of statistics, and I don't really pay that much attention. I look at trends on those kind of things, on the statistics, not necessarily the individual one, but this one stuck with me, that 60% of online shopping carts are abandoned if there are not proper security controls. Meaning, if there's not a CAPTCHA or something that you have to click on, right, or there's not a two-factor thing, or there's not some type of a security control before they're going to put their credit card in, 60% of carts are abandoned without security controls on them. And that really stuck with me. Like I said, I don't bury myself in statistics. I look at the trends. But what that told me is that if you want to have a business, really, or if you certainly want to have competitive advantage in that business, you're expected now in your online presence to have security controls in place, because your consumers are now expecting that to be there and want to be properly protected, which means that the convenience factor has now fallen way to the security factor in the culture. And
I think
that blew my mind. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
That's amazing. And if you think about the amount of missed business or lost business just because they didn't have one of those security protocols in place is huge. But it's also cool that the general public is becoming more aware and is starting to require that and then prioritizing that. I mean, I know that a lot of the websites still, for example, in Japan, they don't have HTTPS. I won't go to those. If I'm talking to a potential customer or business partner, and if they haven't, upgraded their website, made it secure, that already immediately raises a couple flags for me, right? I mean, it's just like, so I think it's really becoming important. And I do like the analogy related to our transportation systems. And when you were talking through the seatbelt thing, I just was remembering, sort of transportation related. Do you remember? I mean, people used to be able to smoke on airplanes. I mean, how crazy is that? Yeah. My kids are like, no way. I was like, yeah, you could just light up. Hey, so from where you sit, what are some of the key changes that you're going to see related to IT in 2023?
The most important thing from a security perspective, I know you said IT, but me being focused purely in security. And actually, it affects a lot of the IT things. So we used to, and still do, of course, to some degree, we're chasing compliance targets, right? We're PCI, right? Go down the list, HIPAA, HITECH, like we talked about before. Cyber insurance is the new compliance. That's the statement, right? As cyber, I mean, you almost have to have a cyber policy now. Cyber insurance rates are going through the roof. and claims are all over the place. So we deal with a lot of this kind of thing and answering these questions for our clients that we manage. So whereas, it used to be best business practices and those kind of things, but if you want to have a cyber policy, and chances are, it's as cliche as it is, it's not if but when, and you don't have the right coverage, keeping in mind that insurance job, their job to their shareholders is to not pay you, and they're going to look for every possible way to find fault with what you've done, or find fault with that incident, in other words, to keep from having to pay you. So the main thing for me is cyber insurance is the new compliance.
Okay, have you seen any of the carriers offering discounts to their customers based upon their level of their security posture, or by going through some type of assessment, whether the insurance company provides the assessment, or if it's something that the customer can actually just show them, hey, we went through this ring of security methodology, and here's where we started, here's where we ended up. Can we get a discount on our rates, our premiums? Have you seen anything like that?
I'm going to say all of them. However, the way they manifest themselves are a little bit different. Okay, so it may or may not be a quote discount, but it'll be a different rate class or something like that. Or they're just simply not going to write you, right? So they're going to ask you, they used to just ask you, do you have two-factor authentication? Well, that question in and of itself is inadequate, because we have how many access points? So you can have two-factor authentication on your email, but not on your VPN, and that's obviously more wide open. So depending on the insurance company and how they write it, the questionnaires have become a lot more intrusive. They want not just specific tactics on do you have, but where is it? How are you using it? Kind of a thing, right? And then any number of things: policy, procedure, password, complexity, right? All of those kind of things. So pretty standard questions that they ask. And if you don't meet all of the requirements, then either A, they won't write you, or B, they'll put you in a different rate class because you're a different risk. Some of them will say that it's a discount. I know Travelers has that. That we deal with stuff. AIG and Chubb do more of the rate class thing. But so the answer is yes. Across the board, if you have a robust security posture and a mature security program, you are going to get a better rate, whether it's through a discount or rate class or something like that.
Okay, understood. Let's turn it around. If you're working with one of your customers and you want to give them some advice in terms of how to get the best policy for them, what are some of the key things that they should be looking at with a policy?
Sure. So most of the things that the insurance companies are asking are basic security practices, right? So, are you doing training? Well, if you're doing annual training, check that box, yes. But we all know, as we just talked about, annual training is basically ineffective, and when we need to strive more towards culture. We mentioned two-factor authentication. Are you doing that? Where is it? How's that located? Most of the insurance questions are, like I said, basic practices. So if you follow, an 800-53 or a 27001 or any of those, if you get pretty close, chances are you'll do well on your insurance exam, right?
Got it. So, but in terms of the policy itself, are there any things or items that you would, want to make sure that are included in the policy? Whether it's minimum or maximum policy value versus certain conditions where they would pay out versus not paying out. Have you seen any kind of like potential flags that, hey, you know what, if this is in your policy, you might want to go back and talk to your provider?
Yeah, there have been several companies out there that the restrictions on the payouts have been so tight, it's almost reached the level of scam. Most of those are the very basic, the $5 million policies that go for somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 a year, and they don't pay. Most of the restrictions around payment are client negligence. It's probably the best way to say it, right? So when somebody clicks on something, something happens. Well, if you hadn't clicked on that, then that wouldn't have happened, and your training or whatever. So we're not going to pay you. When 70-80% of the ransomware attacks come through email, somebody clicking on something, right? And they know that. So really got to watch out for client negligence would be the first one. And back on the questionnaires, they're going to ask you about patching, right? So if you haven't patched in 6 months, going back to the first part of our conversation, and those patches had been available and you didn't patch and you got hacked, your insurance company is highly likely not going to pay because that's going to come back again to client negligence, which points back again to what program do you have underneath all of this to make sure everything is happening the way it needs to happen, right?
Definitely, and makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned cyber insurance is the new compliance. That's one key trend in IT security for 2023. Any other big changes that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, one more for sure. In our world, in our security world, we call the war in Ukraine, we call it the hybrid war. You don't ever see that in the mainstream media. The war in Ukraine, whatever, and the only thing that you hear about there are the kinetic attacks. I think today or yesterday, the drone strike that put 1.5 million people out of power. You hear those kind of things, right? What you don't hear about is the cyber war that's going on. So the first 2 or 3 months of all that was mostly just activist groups. There was really no nation state actors involved. The general thought in the market was the general fear of we don't know what the other one has from a cyber perspective. We don't want to open up that can of worms, so to speak, and then get counterattacked and so forth, right? So now the nation state actors are very actively involved, not doing a whole lot. However, there are tools over there that are being developed and distributed on the dark web for power grids. Okay, so translate that into Internet of Things. So translate that into the tools are being developed at an accelerated rate because there is a war going on, and necessity is the mother of all inventions, as we all know. So they are actively developing cyber tools up there to try to get a leg up on the war. So the activity in tool development and distribution is highly accelerated. That translates into others picking up those tools on the dark web and then using them across the world, right? So specifically on IoT type targets in the US, we've seen a spike in those. And I think as long as this war goes on, and you have a very vested interest by well-resourced nation-state actors to develop these tools, those tools are going to be made available, and then they will be sent out into, we'll call it the public, but on the dark web, right? So people pick those things up. They will improve upon them, also at an accelerated rate. And then so the point is that these tools, because of the war, are being developed, and therefore they're being used back against government and commercial entities here in the U.S. and around the world. So anytime you have something like that and you have accelerated tools, you have people out there that can pick them up, improve upon them, and distribute and use them.
Yeah, it's some pretty scary stuff. And again, like when I first got into this space, I had several misconceptions, and one of them was that to be a hacker, you had to be like this tech whiz. And now you just see hacking as a service or cybercrime as a service. People like anybody can just go on the dark web and either buy the technology or even outsource the operation of the technology. It's, tell them your target, and it's pretty scary. And I don't see how we can ever get to the end of that kind of situation. Because I've talked to people who that's what they do is that, they operate in that space, and they say as soon as you shut down, one point of entry, they can, switch to 15 others. So, it's not going to go away tomorrow. That's for sure.
Well, it's not going to go away ever. And as long as it makes money, it's going to keep making money. And as long as there are people, the interesting thing about that to me is we would say, compromised morals or something like that. But there are so many nation state actors that see the U.S. especially as being entitled, having more than we need, or whatever you want to say about that, that it's their 9-to-5 job. They have no guilt at all about taking money from Americans, and just because that's their culture. So as long as that exists and it makes money, this is going to be out there. And as organized crime continues to grow, I mean, the last statistic I heard, which I said, I don't really follow statistics, but about somewhere between 40 and 45% of all the ransomware comes from two organizations. Which I found really, really interesting. And I would expect that number to continue to grow from those guys as they get more operationally efficient. Right. So it's not going to end. As long as it makes money, it's going to be there. So our job is to do the basic things that we need to do. Basic cyber hygiene, having a program, knowing your business impact analysis, protecting properly the things that need to protect it, being properly resourced, all of that kind of thing solves about 98% of those problems. If somebody is going to very deliberately come after you, they're probably going to get you, because we have to be right 100% of the time. They have to be right only but once, right?
Yep.
But even if we miss that spot, if we have our proper program, we have our incident response in place, and it's properly tested and all those kind of things. If we have our program, then like I said, right, it turns into an eye roll and not a run down the street with your hair on. We know what our recovery time is going to be. You give the heavy sigh. Okay, all right, this is what we're doing today, and we'll get those systems back up online, and the impact is minimal, and we make the adjustments and move on. But that's the best that we can hope for, is keep our business up, know that when it happens we're properly prepared, we know what our recovery time is going to be, and we've done so deliberately, right?
Yes, and I think that's some excellent advice. I mean, you can put your head in the sand and pretend that everything's okay, or you can actually do the work, figure out, what you have, what you need to protect, and then put a plan in place and just execute on that. So it's all great advice. Hey, Bryant, I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure we could probably keep talking here, but it's already close to about 45 minutes here. I'd like to wish you and the rest of your team a great, end to 2022.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time. I really enjoyed it. Look forward to coming back.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.